Yatayami
Sanje Chedan Soje Chona La Chanju Pado Dani Jasoi Lagi Chijin Jive Sonanje Drola Benje Sanje Druva Sanje Chedan Soje Chona La Chanju Pado Dani Jasoi Lagi Chijin Jive Sonanje Drola Benje Sanje Druva So Sanje Chedan Soje Chona La Chanju Pado Dani Jasoi Dagi Chijin Sonamji and Ruba Sho Ladana Medam Anji, Amboda Jajina, Suju Chola Chabana Sanja Sumbara, Sushi, Ruba, Jaji, Mechin, the Vajay, the Ranges of the Chivati, Chivati, Chotation, Gua, the 11 years, same. Ambi Dani, Levatula, Tuvesunia, Namola, Ludan, Nation, Rubunda, American, and Roba Kunji, Chisam, Tamjer Gadu, and Darwish, and all Lazoda. That Lamzo in Agasa, Tanjonia, Tella Loma, but Yella Combe, Sitting Nasha Do, Yang Combe, Chim, Casalende, Koya Dunganum, Yang Combe, Chim and Nasha Do, Chani, also one Nashi Chani. 다 단조 텐진이 가다 아니 치와입니다 바사메 아니 단단디 남주 가수 아니 랜데 예단 제비나 샤셰데 교증了마자 마도 교충了야자가 말이 인장 랜데 묘데 교증了마자 인장 단조니가 첼라롱 바일라 건배 체체 나샤도 세가나 다 가상 시와 나신 전에 단전예가 삼 아니 치유도 매도 민주와 개발된 거와 개발랑 안로라 된로 니래 말해 봐 안로 제나 아니 다 콘트시아 그 동안 봐도 매봐 용거와 인장 아니 다 개와 치마 아니 원디르제 어 가상의 시와가 가서래 Lamzola Soana, Lamzes, Lamdela Soana, Tibilla, Dota, Soana, Chene, Ojawa Chima, Undo Hamilton, Quawan, Tendine. The Undo Hamu command subject to any children, Mugajibunga children are back. Telayang, or Joe Chung or Telaya, Joe Chung, Jumbo Water, Joe Chung, Chabarchen, Ni Chene. Oh, Chima, Andrew Dungala Tena, Chim, Anikawa Chima on the combatam, tend to Yagadella, Joe Chung, Jumbo Asigore. Now, when you combat Chabarchen, because only you combat tend to Yawa Tang, Nandrola Taiwan when you combat them to buy tend to Yawa Mayimba. That Kasan can issue an Ashi Cheni, a lamb to be Dan, Joe Chimbi Lamji Rimba, Yansulimbe, Dan, the Latin Pisum Sawa. 아니 고고와 인장 오된 피순 차와지 아니 저와는 말아 규대 양수련 거와 인장 텐데 양수련 간데라 아니 온디 오 저가서 개발제 주치면 개발제 쓴거 아닌 바래 어디 되게 다 온도 개발제 주대 가상 완전 마 이제 처음에 마 쉬사와체
So here, there's a verse in the three principal aspects of the path, which says that by considering impermanence and death and suffering, then one turns away from attachment to this life. Here, this line out of the verse indicates the attitude of the person of a lesser scope, that is, a person who is concerned primarily with achieving a good rebirth in the next life. And here, the way in the three principal aspects of the path text, it's by meditating on the preciousness and rarity of a human life that we've obtained at this moment, as well as the inevitability of death, which will come and stop this life that we have now, as well as considering the sufferings that will arise if we fall into the lower states of existence in our next life. Then by meditating on all of these topics, we develop less concern and eventually no concern for the temporary events that occur in the course of the rest of this life, the pleasures and so forth of this life. We no longer are fixated on them and attached to them. However, and then here in the three principal aspects of the path, it doesn't explain specifically the relationship between karma and its results, and especially the way in which negative, non-virtuous karma produces suffering, and especially the sufferings of the three lower forms of existence, the three evil destinies, in this specific context. Rather, in the three principal aspects of the path, that meditation on karma and its effects is applied in the context of the person of intermediate scope. But that's just basically a different way of presenting the same ideas, depending upon whether one connects it to the person of lesser scope or the person of intermediate scope. Here in the Precious Garland, it begins by showing how negative actions, non-virtuous actions, give rise to the suffering experiences in the future lives, such primary experience being rebirth in the evil destinies, and then secondary forms of experience being the different kinds of defects that one will experience even if born as a human. So the presentation is different as far as the arrangement of the topics, but the intent is identical. Now, here, when we talk about a person of lesser scope and a person of intermediate scope, the person of lesser scope is concerned specifically with not falling into a lower state of existence in their next life, but rather attaining an excellent kind of life in their next subsequent life, and then continuing to achieve excellent forms of life, high status, over and over again, repeatedly. Now, if the person is simply concerned with that alone, if one is only interested in achieving a good form of life in the next life, then you're called a person with that attitude who considers cause and karma and its results, who considers the preciousness and rarity of the current life and the inevitability of death and so forth, all of these meditations, then that person is called a person who has merely a small scope. Their objective is merely limited to achieving good lives in the future. Now, in this context of the Precious Garland, as well as the three principal aspects of the path, that alone is not sufficient. Rather, it's necessary for the person to have a sort of overriding attitude of the Mahayana attitude, the greater vehicle attitude of wishing to become a Buddha. And so if one develops the meditations that pertain to the person of small scope with the overriding attitude of bodhicitta and the wish to become a Buddha, then one is called a special person of smaller scope. That is, you have the smaller scope, but it's qualified by this special overriding attitude.
Oh, yeah. Lende milu kowe dunga nam yang samne chime na xie do se ga la ta lende de jiu zheng la ma jia la rin ga so le le dan de yu na xie xie ba de jiu chung la ya jia o du sim ba de da dini lende milu kowe dunga nam se ga la ani ju o ge de gi le ju ge wa dan mi ge bi le le ani de wu de du chung ha dang de la de ne da ga so re Lende milu koya dunga nam sirikala da le de la kasashuwa na xin lende chilsamba chit yuwa yore. Di na ne da le de la sonam ji le da sonam mayin bi le miki kaso re miyo wi le sumung yuwa yin zang. Da tendra wi sonam da miyo wi le sumbo te kante chi sa ne le ti wangi ani lenyu ji pumbo chi len xin je la ani dunga ji lang xin na ma de ba. 난로 제나 동아요 아장장 오늘 사람 미인대와 탐나야 동아질 하시는 마대봐 수단 수매라 제나양 아니 동아다요 말에 대 아니 풍부딜란 시제라 아니 차원도 지금 동아를 하시는 마대봐 인장 아니 남조그 시주대 라마 집에 나서 레다님은 발론 차도 주 동아숨지 치서만베제 타면지로 시조 첨보래 탄데 슌라게와 친지로 세게 오데 타바테니고 로게도 숨거래 요 레다님은 발론 차도 주 감숨 저와 레슨보제 감숨 저와 강제주 강도 제장 아니 동아제라 숨래 마대봐 레다님은 그 발론 초대 아니 동화섬지 치승만비 제 세가나 동화다 규동화다 차와도지 동화섬 치승만비 제 대라위 아니 사전 예len지 풍보대 내 치자라 다 님보 덤된지 고마도나 아니 세페 탐매봐 탐매지롱 대라위다 코에라 아니 가고 레다님은 그 왕어지 아니 풍부되라 아니 탄되지라 기억고 만다마서
So here, then again the second half of that verse, out of the three principal aspects of the path, it says that one should contemplate the fact that karma and its results are infallible, and by the relationship between karma as cause and the experience of suffering and other forms of experience as result, that relationship is infallible. Here, this is, and by considering that, then one should turn away from one's interest in the future lives as well. So here, within the context of the three principal aspects of the path text, this kind of meditation pertains to the person of intermediate scope who, in that context, meditates upon karma and its results as a way of developing revulsion towards samsaric existence in general, and therefore develops the attitude of wishing to achieve liberation from the entirety of samsara, not just from the sufferings of the three lower realms of existence, as is the case with the person of lesser scope. However, this formulation of it is simply a different arrangement, because if we look in the stages of the path text that J. Rinpoche also wrote, we find that the meditation on karma and its results is also found in those texts in the context of the person of lesser scope, and so the arrangement is simply different, but they're appropriate in both contexts regardless. So here, when if we're talking about it in terms of the person of intermediate scope, someone who is developing renunciation of samsaric existence in general, then you think about the relationship between karma as the actions ethical actions we perform, as well as the resultant experiences, that infallible relationship that, as we mentioned yesterday, that karma is definite. It's inevitable that specific types of karma produce specific kinds of results. So when we think about that, if we produce virtuous, meritorious kinds of karma, then we'll experience happiness in the upper realms of existence. We'll experience the lives of the upper realms of existence, as well as the pleasant experiences that occur within those lives. And then if we produce non-virtuous, non-meritorious karma, we'll infallibly experience suffering, and we'll experience rebirth in the evil destinies, lower states of existence, as well as all of the horrible sufferings that occur within those realms of existence. And that being so, one should meditate upon the relationship between karma and its results. In general, thinking that even if I'm born in a higher realm of existence as a human, or the gods, of the desire realm or the gods of the physical realm of existence, or even the beings that are absorbed in meditative absorption in the non-physical realms of existence. Those types of life are produced by either virtuous karma in the case of humans and desire realm gods and the gods of the form realms. And then there's also infallible or unwavering karma that produces rebirth in the higher realms of the physical realms and the non-physical realms of meditative absorption. So if you think about that even if you, of course, not to mention rebirth in the lower realms of existence by virtue of non-meritorious or non-virtuous karma, but even when one is born as a human or one of these higher God realm existences, all of those experiences, although even if they're produced by virtuous or meritorious karma, they're still governed by the pervasive nature of being constructed by karma and mental afflictions. So even in the highest form of meditative absorption, although there's no coarse forms of suffering experience or sensations and so forth, one is still born there under the control of karma and mental afflictions, and so therefore one is not passed beyond that kind of suffering of being created out of the mental afflictions and contaminated karma. So that being the case, one should think that regardless of where one is born in samsara, of course in the lower realms, but even in the upper realms, one is not free from samsaric suffering, is still governed by suffering, and therefore, based on that meditation on the relationship between karma and its results, you should develop the renunciation, wish to achieve liberation from samsara in general.
Oh yeah. Lende milo kowe 동안에 양아섬네 치만 나셔도 세가다 나셔도 세가 조 동안에 와 중사디 아니 다시 쉬와 나세 이제 사전 예례지 풍부되라 동아 세대 그 동아가 나네다 사전 예례지 풍부되이 말이 그봐 대한 아니 동아지 동아라 니중제와 전로라 요와체 아니 주 동아라 니중제와데 아니 치료와라 요와체 반절로서 최견적 송도와 대한 동안 탄데 된로 라야치 사제 소원 대화라 이주 치료와라 예 대나 두지 동아지 사제 예련 풍보라 동안 루단 루바이 아니 30권나 친요 주를 전에 반절로서 최견의 차진 고디 반에 와질 요아래 오 대인자 다 가서래 동아지 동안에 아니 내중제와 전달해요 와레스 사제 초원 대화랑 내중제니 아니 다 3년 중 의시 토니 대박 니모랑 내중제와 다 삼수제가 도바 싫어요 와인바래 어때 주동안랑 내중제와 다도 내중제사대 가와래서나 안에 사제 예련지 풍부들에 대랑 내중 간대지 뛰그래 서나 텐라와데 동안 주바 사전 예례지 동안 추바다 세가나 아니 가서래 동아지 시당 동아랑경 오 전에 달라리치 몰래 마투스마 송아이 말
So here then, if we talk about what is suffering, and if we talk about wishing to get out of suffering, to rise from it, to achieve liberation, suffering is primarily refers to the aggregates which are contaminated, the components that make up the personality, the person, and individually and collectively that make up the person. And these aggregates are taken up, appropriated due to the force of karma and mental affliction, and therefore they are contaminated in that way. So here then, all of the various the forms of existence and the experiences that occur for a person as long as they have taken up the aggregates which are appropriated or taken up by the force of karma and mental affliction, and thus are contaminated. All of the entirety of this is of the nature of suffering. Now, in terms of the various categories of suffering, there's everyday forms of suffering, pain, and so forth, and then there's the suffering of the suffering of how would you translate transformation? Yeah, transformation. Yeah. So the suffering of transformation, which is that which is contaminated happiness has as its very nature is actually of the nature of suffering, and therefore is liable to transform into suffering as such. So the contaminated aggregates are pervaded by that sort of nature. And then this third form of suffering is subtler and is defined as the pervasive suffering of being created here. And so in terms of these three types of suffering, it's the master Panchen Losang Chugi Gensen at the beginning of his work on the Great Seal says that that even animals renounce ordinary suffering. That is, animals recognize that they are suffering, that they are experiencing pain, and so forth, and they have a revulsion towards that. They wish to get out of it. And then also then, with respect to this suffering, which is the sort of transformative nature of contaminated happiness, even the non-Buddhist, there are non-Buddhist practitioners who understand this and develop a wish to be free from that, a sort of renunciation of that suffering of transformation, that contaminated happiness is of the nature of suffering, and they develop renunciation of that as well.
Oh yeah, that in the end, Truby Dunga, Sena, Sajan Yelenji Pumbo Digi, Ane Sajan Yeleji Pumbo Mame, Ane Sajan Yeleji Pumbo Di Druba Yenzang, Di Druba La Tene Dunga Chunga Yenzang, Umba Truby Dunga Siguare. Umba Truby Dunga Sena, Pumbo Di Lawa La Tene, Ane Ta, Kiwi Dunga, Pumbo Di La Tene Yunga, Gawi Dunga, Nawi Dunga, 치위 동아 제가 나지 동아 탐제 아니 풍부들라 때네 쟁기와 인상 동아 탐제 다 풍부들랑 발라 때네 중화 인상 풍부들 출발라 때네 동아 대다 중화 인상 뭔가 출비 동아 yeah.
So then we can consider also how it is that the contaminated aggregates are of the nature of suffering in terms of the way in which they are produced from suffering, and that they in turn produce suffering. That is, the present contaminated aggregates, the aggregates which we've taken up by the force of karma and mental affliction, these are of the nature of suffering because they arise from previous instances of these contaminated, appropriated aggregates, which were of the nature of suffering. So therefore, the previous instances of the contaminated aggregates served as the cause which created or produced the current state of these contaminated aggregates that we are currently in. And then the current state of the contaminated aggregates itself, the current condition itself serves as the foundation or basis for subsequent instances and produces subsequent instances of this state of being dominated by the karma and mental affliction, the aggregates that were taken up by contaminated karma and mental affliction. Because once you have taken up this kind of contaminated aggregates, you'll inevitably experience in the future birth, aging, sickness, and death as a consequence of possessing the contaminated aggregates at present.
我印象，到底这个那些东亚个电视个些，这里对我啦，对东亚的西藏，东亚的西塞，东亚样，俺的碰不得了在那接话当，对东亚样，他说啥子你的碰不得了在那接话当，这个，俺的我把区别东亚，俺的我把区别东亚，我把区别东亚，东亚的西。 교육동아지시 아니 차와도시 그 동아랑 거 전에다 뭐요 거는 시야연 바래.
So here then we can say that the aggregates are of the nature of suffering, have a suffering nature. These here, specifically the aggregates which are appropriated by the force of contaminated karma and mental affliction are of the nature of suffering in 5 aspects. One, because they form sort of like the basis or foundation for suffering. They have this nature because they themselves arose from prior states of these contaminated aggregates. They themselves serve as a foundation or basis for birth, aging, sickness, and death. And thus they're sort of like the current state of the contaminated aggregates serves as the basis for subsequent instances of these contaminated aggregates. And then in terms of their basic character, the contaminated aggregates are themselves the field within which the ordinary suffering occurs. Likewise, the suffering of transformation occurs within these contaminated aggregates. And then likewise, the contaminated aggregates have as their sort of fundamental nature this nature pervasive, or they're pervaded by this nature of being created themselves by karma and mental affliction.
Oh yeah, then that 차원 도시지 동아랑 경우 도시지 동아 경우 세대 대 칸데질의 중화에서나 레다 녀몽기 샤완도 주의 풍부连续 왕기 중의 풍부 인상 다 가서를 차원 도시지 동아 어디 nem발라 때네 아니다 동아 탐적 혼도 샤바 나신 어제와连续 풍부의 제와 nem발라 때 제와 我看到看个叫我连说的连云就想往都去碰不得连把天了但呢俺那做我对当地东啊刚刚碰不得了但呢中国有印章太当产呢恐怕年呢你叫我多比来顿白把这现在俺叫我对什么了你就个听得当然吧的当吧
So here then it says that if we consider the third type of suffering, the suffering of being created, what that refers to is that the contaminated aggregates, which are taken up due to karma and mental affliction, they're created by that, and therefore they are governed by they're empowered and governed by the karma and contaminated karma and mental affliction. So therefore they have that kind of nature. They're entirely dominated by that which produces them, the karma and mental affliction. And therefore they have all of the various instances of the appropriated aggregates. When you're talking about the 6 destinies within samsara, humans and so forth, hell beings and so forth, then all of those instances are themselves pervaded by this nature of being created in that way, because they are all instances of the states of the aggregates which are appropriated by karma and mental affliction. And la candy go
앉아서.
I missed something. Yeah.
아, 죄송.
Dimaso.
도와주면서.
Die 두체기 동안
저 두식 동안.
heb 두체기
아니, 그러세요.
die draw rectugla. 캡기도 draw
내년지 시험도 주위 풍부들라 저와 두식 동안 쓰고래서. 아니.
die
인장 내년지 왕그 주위 풍부들 렘발라 때네. 아니 동아 탐제 중화 인장. 대당 차네 세거는 미군바 대당 차네 아니 다위 댄지 댄 렌식 토빌 뒤대라 아니 렌이 그 깨와지 도베탈라 배고레세라 대당 차에 콤바년니 깨완 도빌레도 배바제 깨워듯이 탐을 담바레
대당 draw
대당 차네
대당
미군바 대당 차와
미콤바기 draw
다들 로바타와든다 되지당시 미군바 대당 의송으로 와 오 대단 차네 콤바년니 깨완 도빌레도 배바제
So therefore, when we contemplate this nature of these contaminated aggregates, that they're appropriated through karma and mental affliction, and that the entirety of all of the realms of existence, all of the 6 destinies within samsara, is pervaded by that nature, the entirety of it is instances of instantiations of these contaminated aggregates, and that it's all of the nature of suffering. One should, there's a verse that the master Nagarjuna has addressed to his student, the king Dechu Zangbo, and in that verse he says to the king, once you've considered the fact that you've achieved at this moment a life which is a kind of foundation which is free from the 8 kinds of states in which you have no freedom to practice, then you should make every kind of effort by all means make effort to desist from creating the karma that will produce rebirth within this condition of the contaminated aggregates.
Oh yeah, 내가 다 가서래 사천년지 풍부디 풍부 쿨때 시점 쿠와 대신도 아니 동아지라시만도 대요 고가까지 잡아봐. 쿨 시점 쿠와서 빼라. 안에 도체 첨보죠. 쿨 시점 쿠와 대신도 동아지라신래 대요 고가까지 잡아봐대 빼라 샤네. 사천년비 풍부 쿨 시점 쿠와 대신 쿨와 대신도 풍부디 연례 체제라 안에 동아지라신래 대요 고가까지 잡아봐. 대요까지 잡아봐 인장 다 콜와 세야 풍부대라라 인바이 어때 인자 다 풍부대 땅 아니 차와지고 해야지 다 숨고래.
So then there's an example given for how it is that having once one has appropriated or taken up these contaminated aggregates, which are governed by karma and by contaminated karma and mental affliction, then the example given is like they're like a heavy burden. It's like if you have a huge pack that you have to carry on your back. As long as you are carrying that heavy pack on your back, there's not a single moment while it's there that you are comfortable. There's no moment or occasion as long as you're bearing this huge load on your back that you are there's no moment of comfort within that situation. So the contaminated, the aggregates which are appropriated by the force of contaminated karma and mental affliction are just like that kind of huge burden that we have to bear. And as long as we have it, there's no moment of relaxation or comfort.
인자 신이 가서 코와 텐다 라베 코와 생각에 가르래서 치료를 해봐. 아니 랑게 사전 일이 풍부지 개와들이 신자라 아니 가서래 코아르께와 렌세 다가 임바리 이제 코아 텐라 라베 사제니네 이 풍보디 코아 텐라 라베 함미당 냐와 예다 텐라 하마인 다 저와 리주 가르루 깨나야 사제지 풍보디 렌신바 인상 아니 깨와 삼보를 말아 렌이 이게 방게 깨와데 깨와 삼보를 말아 네버트미 네규 라젠제 풍보디 레반발라 때네 안에 동아 강 다시 콘도 샤바기 동아 자 강가 풍보디 레발라 때네 주 아니 중화 인장 아니 네버트미 네규 임바디 아니 캔구그레 제니 아니 다 자오습니다.
So here then, these verses that we're discussing here come out of the letter to a friend, which Master Nagarjuna addressed to his friend, the king, Dejusangpo. And there he's explaining that what is samsara? Samsara is the aggregates. It is the aggregates which have been appropriated through the force of, taken up by the force of mental, contaminated karma and mental affliction. So these aggregates themselves, they themselves are like this burden, and the burden of samsara, which we have to carry. As long as we have that, there's no moment of actual comfort or peace as long as we're bearing this burden of the contaminated aggregates. Now, here he says to the king, continuing to address the king, instructing the king that now you might think if you're born in some high state of existence as a human or God or whatever, that you've achieved some degree of comfort or peace. That's not really the case, because even in those conditions, you're bearing this heavy burden of the contaminated, afflicted aggregates. So wherever you're born, in any of the 6 destinies, even if it's as a human of high status with wealth and pleasure and so forth, or as a god even, and then of course within the lower realms of existence as a demigod, or in the lower realms of existence as an animal, hungry ghost, or hell being. All of these realms of existence are themselves cases of these states of the contaminated aggregates, and thus there's not a single moment and single occasion within all this entire form of existence in which there is actual, you're free or actually enjoying true happiness or peace.
Oh yeah. 나 개와 노바 제발라 렌인지 풍보디 개와도 노바 렘바 풍보함 렌인지 안에 풍보디 개와 노바 제발라 안에 티주 당진 도거라 좋아 주 당진 마도 발라 안에 대우 렌인지 풍보디 미도바 내 코비 동아 여도 다 당진 된지 개반에 대촌의 집이 탑수라 부타된 원지 배벌주 전에 오다 군대 전배양 그 소만 나신 내 코비 동아 여도 초 세가 강라 롱제버게네 아니 코에 니지 된탕 강기 롱제베게 아니 주지 semyen 렌이지 왕고 충미 아니 가사 대다기 주대 가와래서 완 칼을 제바래서 안은 다도 집에 단정을 제바래서 다 대우동 연리지 품모사 동아데 메데나 대교 안 다단진데 도와 치고래서 다단진 도와 제발라 안에 가래래서나 도만지도 거와인다 연진기 현유 수 진발 제발 총전 총내 제발기 안에 사모 동반일 도거와인자 가서래 내 코비 동아 예도 제자 단진 된지 제발네 대촌내 집이 촌내 집에 탑라 안에 부탄의 양지 배바져서 타바 등간지 이나 타바 토고래 타바 토바라 랭인 그 샤완전지 풍벌래 타르고래 대포 타바라 뒤주도고래 주도바 샤발라 안에 다 가서래 도제게 라나 배고와 인자 다 돈이 도 비셔를 배고야 두신 말이야.
So here then, the final point in that is that any kind of birth within the 6 realms of existence is necessarily a case of these contaminated aggregates, and therefore one should make all effort to achieve the method, to develop the method for ceasing rebirth within this samsara, the states of the contaminated aggregates. Then the next point is, what is the method by which one achieves that? Once one's developed the wish to become free from that kind of condition, what method does one have to employ in order to achieve freedom from rebirth within samsara, the various states of the contaminated aggregates? The method for that is only understanding selflessness. The wisdom which understands the selflessness of things is the sole method which ceases the process of rebirth within the state of being embodied within or existing within the condition of the contaminated aggregates. 라겐디 직제 군탕기 직제 이마소.
내 코에 동아 여도 쪽. 그러와 내 코에 동아 여도 저세가 강도 내비 코에 내 니지직된데 체. 강란 내와기 아니 주지 섬제 련이 시원전지 강사대 내 코로 그 코에 동아 여도 쪽. 대제제 가르래서는 다든 당진 된지 개반네. 다도 좀 강사다 쳐이도 당진이 된지 개반나.
다도 좀 봐.
강사다 쳐지 다도 좀 니 와라. 저오시게 돼. 저오 와라. 타바타바를 저오러 와니. 다든 당진 된지 개반네. 아니 대초내 집에 탑주라서 당진기 현유 총내 집에 탑주라 배고래서 당진기 현유 총내 집에 다음에 또 비셔럽때 돈이 또 별로더라.
So here then, the entirety of samsara, when one is speaking of samsara, one can speak of it in terms of both the environment, the external world, which is the sort of habitat, the environment within which living beings exist. And then, or one can speak of it in terms of the inhabitants that exist within that environment, the living beings themselves. The entirety of this samsaric beings, as well as the entirety of the world, which is the field within which living beings exist. This entire samsara, the source of it is finally comes down to the misconception of the self. The misconception of the self is the root cause for both the environment as well as the inhabitants, the living beings that exist within the world. So here, there's the verse from the master Guntang, who says that one should identify, when one understands that this misconception of the self is the enemy that gives rise to all of this, then one should make effort to eradicate that enemy. One should fight and destroy, eliminate that enemy, which gives rise to the entire realm of suffering, environmentally and as well as the beings living within it. So here, in order to eliminate this misconception of the self, you first have to come to understand that the object which appears to the misconception of the self itself is non-existent. That is, the supposed object or the object appearing to the misconception of the self is non-existent. So therefore, in order to eliminate the misconception of the self, one has to understand the non-existence of the object of that misconception. 다음에 또 비셔럽.
다음에 또 비려봤다 가서다 유튜브 봐라. 다음에 또 비셔라 또 비셔랍디 강사도 취지 당전 또 받친가 대문도 아주 해야 되고 싶고.
So here, this is the topic that we've arrived at actually in the text here, that the wisdom that understands selflessness, there are two forms of it, that which selflessness of person, selflessness of other phenomena. And in both cases, then, it's the verse from the Master Guntang relates to that you have to understand, recognize that as sort of the enemy, the misconception of the self, and then understand that the object that is conceived or grasped by that misconception is non-existent.
가상산이 시에기 가사당 풍부대매도 또베 두긴도 비전조 세고 두긴 도제기 로데라 아니 다 가사다 풍부 대매도 또베 로데 다음에 또베 로데체 그와 두긴 제제기 주데 다다 중에 샤와나 신시 가사다 취 당진기 짜짜 저거 당진대체 다 대도박이 탑대라 돈이 또베 샤라도 인자 다 가상 아주 대 가사도 풍부 대매도 또가 두긴도 비 전지 배된세가나 아니 전지 배된데 파 친찬이
So here then, in the precious Garland, we've arrived at the point where we've explained already, discussed previously, that the source, all suffering as well as the origin of suffering, arises out of that misconception of the self, misconception of self of persons, misconception of the self of other phenomena. And thus, we've explained that how it is that that misconception conceives or grasps at a non-existent object, an object which is actually unreal, and that it arises from that. So we've explained that by means of the example, the sort of concordant example, which explains this in a positive direction, showing how that unreal object and is conceived, misconceived, and then now we've arrived at the object. The example, which is of the opposite form of the example.
Oh yeah, that 되게 도피 배달라. 기타 멜론 마담바 랑시 수년 메나타르. 기타 멜론 마담바 랑시 수년 메담바타르 세가라. 멜론라 마담바라 티나게 아니 랑기 아니 신기 아니 신선한 돈라 세가라. 돈기 수년 메나와타르. 폼볼라 마담바 나짐바야 대단 드라베스. 폼볼라 마담바 랑신지 추와 짐비 짐바야 대단 드라베. 아니 랑신지 짐바 짐 아니 폼보 랑신지 메바 또발라 때네 랑신지 짐바 집에 안진기 현유의 키베 아니 다단다게와 짐바 또바티하 아니 시와차고.
So this then when the example example of the opposite case is given in verse 31, where it says, depending upon a mirror, the reflection of one's face is seen. I'm sorry, I made a mistake. It's 32. Wait, no? I'm sorry, yeah, 33. The Tibetan has the number wrong. Okay. Without depending on the mirror, the reflection of one's face is not seen. Likewise, without depending on the aggregates, there is no notion of an I. So that's showing basically the contrary of the initial example that we gave. So it says the explanation of this. It says just as without depending upon a mirror, the reflected image of one's own face doesn't appear. It doesn't appear in it, just like that. Without depending upon the aggregates, without depending upon holding the aggregates to exist by means of their own intrinsic nature, then the idea of an I, of an intrinsically existing I, or the misconception of the I or self, is since it's just like that, Therefore, in dependence upon understanding that the aggregates are devoid of intrinsic nature or intrinsic existence, depending upon that kind of understanding, one should know that one is in that way able to eliminate the misapprehension of the I or the self and that which is mine or that which belongs to a self. This misapprehension of I and mine, misconception of I and mine, depends upon misconceiving the aggregates as if they existed by means of their own intrinsic nature.
Oh yeah, that thing beden shaba kadre sana. Ani be gaso sunya rashi me ba she, 是吧? 아니 tenji 가서 가사다 풍보라 심에 받아 송기도와 다 가사다 풍보 제제 라신지 추베 동데 덴디 인비칠 변나 소년신 시 덴디지 덴디 샤바 이노 송도와 디다다자 지고 말이 是吧 가사다 풍보선이 최전이라 가사다 풍보니구나 때때 지고 말이 是吧 가르레서나 내가 가사 시제 라신지 추에 동데 덴디 인비칠 전에 과 마도 가사다 풍보니 라신지 추에 동데 덴디 인비칠 세간라 가사다 풍보니 덴디기 균전지 가사다 풍보니 라신지 추가 뒤념도 도고 와래. 그래서
니마스원티. 가사다 뒤념도 얘기가 말.
뒤념도 또 그래서. 최전라 가사다 풍보 송하러 와. 가사다 풍보 라신지 추와 동바래 동아인데 댄데 인비칠 자리잖아. 아니 가사의 풍보대 댄데 인비 균전지 라신지 마주바대 가사 그 풍보 가사 풍보니 뒤념도 도고 그래. 뒤념하고 그러와. 뒤념도 도고 그러와. 오. 다 가사의 풍보 라신 매바대 뒤념도 또 봐요 말이. 내가 가사 라신 매바 또네. 뒤에서 풍보 라신 매바 또 그래.
So here then, in order to understand that the aggregates are devoid of any kind of intrinsic nature, one has to identify what intrinsic nature is and what that is the object of this misconception and show that it is non-existent. And the same thing applies to the I or the self. In order to understand that that is devoid of intrinsic nature, one has to understand. In order to negate the misconception which holds the I or self as being intrinsically existent, one has to know, identify what that intrinsic existence is, and demonstrate that it is non-existent, that it's not the case. So here then, in the explanation of the example here, in the commentary here, it says, if we're going to explain the example and the intention of the example, what the example is exemplifying or referring to, then we can explain it like this by means of a syllogism or proof statement in which we say the aggregates, the person and the aggregates are the subject. They are the predicate or thing to be established is that they are empty of being established by means of intrinsic nature. And then the reason which proves that is that they are dependent originations. Now, and then filling out the syllogism, it says that, for example, just like a reflected image, and it's this entire proof statement or syllogism is an example, an explanation of the reasoning of dependent origination, using dependent origination as a reason to establish the absence of intrinsic existence with respect to persons and the aggregates. However, there's a problem here because in this formulation of the statement, it says that the subject of the syllogism is persons, the person and the aggregates. Now, the problem there is that you can't use the reasoning of dependent origination to establish the person and the aggregates as being empty of intrinsic existence, empty of being established by means of intrinsic nature or intrinsic existence, because it's not the case that one can establish both of those, both person and aggregates, in that way simultaneously. The way it works actually is that one has to establish the person as being empty of intrinsic existence first, and then establish that the aggregates are empty of intrinsic existence.
Oh yeah, they can't say mirror back under the sana. I didn't say it was a hand on Chunala. Dancing is a Jirim La, Church dancing, Kasaka dancing, by Yang. Damen is a Tenila Jubana, one to Kasaka Dameke, Tawa Kene. Tio to church dame topi tawa ke guso jesun are right yinzang church danzhen dang kansa ge danzhen ni gyule gebi on to chen yi gang la church danzhen ne le ge gu de right da tini ge xian yu da me ba dian la pu de gang la ani kansa ge dame ge tawa ne le ge ne tio to ani church dame topi tawa ge gu de chen ni sun wa de.
So the reason this formulation of the syllogism is incorrect is that it's explained by J. Rinpoche in elsewhere, and is specifically in the exposition of insight. That's the last portion of the great stages of the path. He explains there that when the misconception of the self arises within us, first, there arises the misconception of phenomena, misconceiving phenomena as having a self. And then based upon that misconception of phenomena, there's the misconception of the person as if it had a self arises. So that's the way these two operate in terms of the arising of misconception of self. First arises the misconception of the self of phenomena, then based upon that arises the misconception of a self of persons. However, when it comes to the process of understanding reality, in which one comes to understand the absence of the self, in that you first have to establish that the person is devoid of a self, and then based upon that kind of understanding, you are able to understand that other phenomena in general are devoid of self. So the process of it arising, the misconception arising within our minds, and the process of the understanding of selflessness, the reality which is selflessness, arising in our minds is the sequence is the reverse.
가치 다가들라 차라요 말이 가사라시 주바당 풍보라시 주바니라 차라면 와체 다 가사가 다음에 가사가 된도라시 주바딩냐라 키고와 지당 풍비된도라시 주바디 제라 키고 균전제 가르에서나 최시 가사가 된도라시 주바디 키 나와 풍비된도라시 주바디 키 뜻가와 인장 최시기 내시 가제 나네 많이 받체
So the reason this is so is that, and specifically with respect to the second portion of this, why is it that we have to understand the selflessness of persons before we understand the selflessness of phenomena? It's the selflessness as such. There's no difference between the two, the selflessness of persons and the selflessness of phenomena, as selflessness is the same. There's no difference in the sense of the subtlety with respect to that. And then likewise, in terms of the supposed self, which is to be negated, there's no difference in terms of the self of phenomena, the self of persons, and the self of phenomena. In both cases, the self, which is to be negated there, is something being established by means of its own intrinsic nature or its own intrinsic form of existence. So in both, with respect to both persons and phenomena, the object of negation there, the self, or being established by means of intrinsic nature, is the same. There's no difference in subtlety there. However, and if I said that correctly, that this applies both to the self which is negated as well as the selflessness which is established with respect to persons and phenomena. There's no difference in terms of the subtlety or coarseness between them. However, the reason it's explained that when we're coming to understand this, we first have to understand selflessness with respect to the person, is that there's a difference in terms of the ease with which one can understand selflessness depending upon the base. Here, the concept of self with respect to person is easier to negate than the concept of self that applies to other phenomena. That's the difference that is at issue here. So it's easier to negate the concept, the misconception of self with respect to a person, oneself as a person, than it is to negate it with respect to other phenomena.
Oh yeah, that cheshi neji, and to consact into to lava, the pumpity to lava, the country sana. Kansa says Jodi Zamba, Dashi Pumbola Dana Damba. Pumbola Dana, Davin Achila, and then Kansaji Shakuwa in Zang, Kansa Pumbola Dana Dawa Shaku in Zang, Pumbola Dana Daba, La Dana Shakuwa in Zang, Kansaki Dindu, Kansa Shewa, the Pumbola Dana Daba Zami Yindi, and then Arawandu Madrubati, and then to Lava Yawambati.
So why is it that there's a difference there in terms of the ease and relative ease and difficulty of understanding selflessness with respect to persons as opposed to the relative difficulty of understanding selflessness with respect to other phenomena? The reason it's easier to understand selflessness with respect and it's easier to understand the absence of a self with respect to a person, is that a person is another name for I, and we say I or a person, there's synonymous, and we when we think that when we think of how an I or a person exists, we can see relatively easily that the I or the person is designated in dependence upon its basis of designation, that is, the aggregates. It's the components or aggregates that make up or collectively make up the base for the identification or designation of a person or an I. Seeing that the I or person is dependent upon that base for its designation is relatively easy to understand compared to understanding the way in which phenomena are designated.
Oh yeah, 초지 단에 가서 된대 가서를 캐시 내기 풍보를 때나 다바 인상 안에 강사 생각을 풍보를 때나 다바 인상 풍보라 마도바 아라와도 주바데 킬라와 직체 초지네 다바 총경기 강사 되기 라니 안에 코어 코제기 아니 주 삼로단데 가라 코어 코제기 동아제 잡아 가래 삼로단에 가라 안에 강사 잡아집이 딘딘텔라 토와 인상 딘딘기 강사 담발딘비 딘딘딩 수네 되게 왕기 레사 레기 왕기 아니 코어 코조 삼데 가라 아니 단진디기 셴요 아니 토마 까고와디 아니 어디 로종 강사들 로종을 미왕도 전에 잡아요.
So here then, thus it's relatively easy to see how it is that an I or a person is designated based upon the components or aggregates which make up the base for that identification or designation. So here then, once we can see by understanding how it is that an I or a person is designated based upon the aggregates, which are its basis of designation, we can see that the I or person is not autonomous. It's dependent, contingent upon its basis, the basis for its designation. So that's sort of one side of why it's easier to understand that selflessness of the person, or the selflessness of the person, by seeing the dependence of it upon its basis of designation. Then, from another side, one can say another point of view. One can say that the I, again, the last one, the nga ksa denzin nga kochegi gyu denzin kor ngazin kochegi gyu
tambo ngashi dala shejuji dagi dishingala chajeba sujin chanda rawa mebayi drowa sungdwa tambo nganjingi chikda deji so ngaide ngawe timi chikda ane tela tene lesa ledi wange ane kwar kotu kwar dunga nyonzo nyongo wa yinza nanjo wage dunga nyongenge zawade kawari tutona sana ane nganzingi chikda kansa ke danzen tela tupate hako shego yinza tela chochik dires.
So then the other side of this, why it's necessary to understand selflessness of the I or selflessness of the person first, is that it's this misconception, grasping at the I or the person as being real, which is the primary cause. It's the root of samsara. That is, it's based on this misconception of the I, grasping it as being real, or misapprehending it as being real, the I or the person as being real, that one creates karma. We perform actions based on this misconception of the I. Then we accumulate the karmic propensities for the arising of the results of that karma, and that those results are then samsara. They impel us to migrate through the various destinies within samsara. And so samsara cycles around, driven fundamentally by this misconception of the I as being real, and thus negating that first is another reason why it's presented first in the process of developing understanding of selflessness.
Oh yeah, that 거의 자와라 최지단지다 가사가 다진이가 셰와체 최지단지다 가사 단지를 진단 믿어봐 님해봐 인자 이가 셰와체 다 단진이기 이름라 최지단지를 깨고와디 군장 가르래서나 나 로유도 차와라 가사 로유도 차와라 풍부 로유도 마셔봐라 가사 로유도 차와매봐 풍부 로유도 차 친제라 가사 나시 나와이봐 풍부 로유도 차위 로데라 풍부 된주도 말로 마셔베 로지 자와는 매봐 그러나 풍부 된주도 나 풍부라왕도 추와데 차도 잡아 아니 풍부라왕도 차와기 로테기 풍보라왕도 주와집에 전바데 아니 쟁거는 쟁거 쟁바 치고 와래 깨바 치고 와래구나 풍보 로유도 차대 잡아 강사 로유도 차와라 녜라 풍보 로유도 차고레스 와 풍보 로유도 차대 가라 아니 라시지 주와 마차와라 풍보 로유 차주자는 매봐 가상 나서 아니 타녀비 시와라 아니 시대 로도 차이 가나 시대 아니 멜론 나라 가서 멜론 그 소냐 차와나 멜론 그 차탐 전에 소냐를 차와는 마도 차가시 자신도 차를 차가시 자신도 마차 마인바 시대별로 샤송아 어ten자 타녀비 시와라 근조비 최대 낭 친전라 차탐 전에 라시 주와 낭그 바데 가서 되서와 我라시지 주와 나와 예 나와 되게 라시지 주와 제 전바데 쟁거 와래 쟁바 치고 와래 쟁바 치고 와래 쟁바스네 깨바 치고 와나 인자 최지당 풍보 라시지 주와 나윙에 나와도 풍보에 라라 차와 인자 라시 주와 나와 인자 라시지 주와 제 풍보 라시 주와 제 전바데 최지당 쟁 알게
Okay. So here then, we mentioned here that the misapprehension of the I as being real, or as having a self, which is a kind of existence by means of its own intrinsic nature, or existing by autonomously, is another way of saying that. That arises based upon misapprehension of the aggregates as existing as they appear, being real in the sense of existing by means of their own intrinsic nature or autonomously. Here, at the very before we develop the idea I, that notion of I arises based on an initial apprehension or of the aggregates. And whenever we apprehend the aggregates, or we conceive of or perceive the aggregates, we always do so in a way which conceives them as if they were real, as if they existed by means of their own intrinsic nature or autonomously. So this
풍보 로유 차고요 와 풍보 로유도 마자와라 가 로유도 차야 메아래 와 풍보 로유도 차디 가나 풍보 덴루 로유도 차 마자와 마도 아니 풍보 덴루 로유 마자 풍보 로라 차주 메아래 와 풍보 덴루도 로라 차라 와 이 나와 되게 풍보 덴루를 심비 셴바데 쟁게 와래 셴바
풍보 덴루도 심비
덴루도 제 풍보 덴루도 최지 당진데 쟁게 왔다 인장 최지 당진을 계속아
낭소나 디 최지 당진 쟁
디 풍보 덴바쯤에 덴진데 최지 당진을 와 내려봤다
그래 디 풍보
인장 나와 되게 풍보 덴바 주와 나외 나와 되게 풍보 덴바 주와 집이 짐바디 쟁게 와래
So here what is being said is that the aggregates that is phenomena, here phenomena other than the person as such, when they appear to us, it's like we said previously in the example of the mirror, when the reflected image in the mirror appears in the sense as if it was a face, and it's that appearance as a actual face it appears in all aspects, in all portions, as if it was a real face. So that appearance is entirely an appearance of as if it was a real face. In the example that was given there. Similarly, with respect to the aggregates, when the aggregates appear to us, and here we're talking about ordinary persons and the conventional awarenesses of ordinary persons. When the aggregates appear to these conventional awarenesses of ordinary persons, they appear entirely, all of the aggregates appear entirely as if they were established, as if they were real, as if they actually existed in an autonomous fashion, or existed as if they were they appear as if they exist established by means of their own intrinsic nature. So that appearance of the aggregates as real, as autonomous, existing by means of their own intrinsic nature, that automatically induces within us the misapprehension of them as being real, as if they existed by autonomously or by means of their own intrinsic nature.
Oh yeah, that do any Kasa loyu Sunday Jara Dendu Nane, and it teaches to Kasa Tempa to be dancing the Kasa dancing Gaby, Kasa Gaby, Churchy dancing Gizo, and the Kasa Tempa to be dancing Gaba Yenzang, dancing you could get him Churchy dancing at a kid, Kasa dancing Jelake. The one you would you got it on, Dame do the Kala, Kasa Damen and a door, Churchy Dame Gelato. That to say.
So here then, it's this fact that phenomena appear to us, just the initial appearance of phenomena is as if they were real. They appear as if they were autonomous. They appear as if they were established by means of their intrinsic nature. And that appearance induces within us the misconception that they are real, that they do exist autonomously, that they exist by means of their own intrinsic nature. And so that misconception of the aggregates, that is phenomena in general, as being existing as real, that serves as a basis then for, or exists as when we then form the idea I, or form the idea self, the idea of a person based upon the appearance of the aggregates. And then because of that initial misconception of the self, misconception of aggregates as if they possessed a self or autonomy, intrinsic nature, then that induces within us as well the misconception that the I or the person existed autonomously or by means of its intrinsic nature. So therefore, in terms of the way in which these misconceptions arise, it's the misconception of phenomena, the aggregates that arises first, and then that in turn subsequently induces the misconception of the I or self as being autonomous or real. And then, so that's the way it arises, and in the way in which one develops an understanding that it is not the case, one proceeds in the contrary fashion or the opposite order, by first understanding that the I or the person is devoid of intrinsic nature, and so forth, and then goes on to understand that with respect to phenomena.
Oh yeah. 다 배된다 시아바니 가사다 풍부 최전세데 가사다 풍부 니가 라신지 마주바 마도바 가사다면도 최지다면 니가 마도비 가사지라 가사다 풍부 최전 라신지 주에 동대 댄데 임비치잖아 지금마 다디 다면이라 또 아지 또고 요인자 다 단단 니기 수나 댄데 순구나 가사 라신 매바 또 심비 가사지라 다 가사다 풍부 최전 라신지 주에 동대 댄데 임비치스나 아니 바제 드니 얘기를 와
Well, so here in the commentary, when it's explaining the intention of the example given above about the way in which the reflection illustrates the way in which we misconceive things, here in the actual syllogism that's given in the commentary, where it includes both the persons and the aggregates as the subject, and then the property which is established with respect to that subject, that they are empty of being established by means of intrinsic nature, and then the reason which establishes that property is that because they are dependent originations. Here, that that formulation of the syllogism is not appropriate for someone who has not already understood selflessness. Once you've understood, that is, when you're first coming to understand selflessness, you first have to you just use the person as the subject, and then say the person is empty of being established by means of its intrinsic nature, because it's a dependent origination. And once you've come to that kind of understanding, and then you are able to understand that other phenomena are likewise empty of being established by means of intrinsic nature because they're dependent originations. Once you've understood it with respect to both of them, then this kind of syllogism, this formulation of the syllogism with both persons and the aggregates as the subject would be all right once that's done.
도체 나더니 가서래 최전라 다 풍부 최전 다 가전에 가사 최전 네가 마도 와라 맞대 다들 시원하지 맞지바체 그러다 최전 가사다 풍부 라신지 주에 동대 대 라신 주에 주주다 다 천전바체 그러다 텔란다 제와네 현라랑 마블비 라신디 테메바네 다메바오 테니 최단 가사 비제와니 스토디 송아나시체네 시제비 제와나라 현라랑 말레비 여바데 아니 라신지 주제대체 와 다티 라신지 주에 동대 땡진저와 땡지 임비 세가나 다 땡지세야 되라 아니 규견을 기비 땡지 차샤샤나 되게 되게 아니 또점지 주비 땡지 다 망보 체지리 와 땡지세.
So here then, if we're going through this example, the proof statement or syllogism, and let's take it in the case of someone who has not already understood selflessness. So in that case, we'll take the person as the subject of the syllogism, that it's devoid of being established by intrinsic nature as the predicate or property which is to be established with respect to the subject of the syllogism, and then the reason that establishes the predicate or the thing to be established with respect to the subject is dependent origination. Now, the predicate here not being empty of being established by means of intrinsic nature. In order to understand what is intrinsic nature here, what is that? What is that which is we're trying to prove that this person is devoid of that. So intrinsic nature here is defined in the commentary on the 400 verses of Aryadeva as an autonomous existence. That is literally a form of existence which does not depend upon another. That's the definition here of intrinsic existence, a kind of autonomy in which a thing exists such that it does not depend upon other things, something outside of itself. So the person is empty, devoid of being established by means of that intrinsic existence or that kind of autonomy, because it is a dependent origination. Now, the reason here, dependent origination, there are multiple forms of that. There's the dependent origination in the sense of causality, that is a cause-effect relationship. There's dependent origination in the sense of a kind of dependence of a whole on its parts. That is, a thing which is composed of different parts depends upon its parts for its existence, and likewise the parts depend upon the whole for their existence. And then there's a sort of a sense of dependent origination in which it's a contingency in general. That is, things are contingent in a general sense.
어야 땡데 땡중 다 고사 지금 말해 와 차샤 땡라 땡네 주범 차샤라 땡네 중하세 다 땡중세 데라 사람만 보여 나네 아니 림보치 사비 도이 가수 강 땡네 중아 테니 마시비 텐도스 강 마시바 테니 땡네 중 가서 땡네 중에 텐도스 가라 동바 땡중당 땡중 동비 텐도 수완이 말해 강 마시바 테니 세데 마시바 가와래 sana 강 라와도 마시바 테니 라와도 투밤 라와도 예바 마시바 테니 땡중 그 테레스 강 땡지 중화 테니 마시비 텐도 세가라 라와도 마주비 테레 주송 뭐 잡이잖아 저 강당
데네 중화
강 땡네 중화 강인바 테니 저 강당 강 땡주 인바 테니 마치비 테노 세나 아라완도 마치비 테노 강 마치바 테니 동반이 강인바 테니 땡네주비 텐도.
So here, this what is it then? Dependent origination. As we said, there are multiple connotations of this term. It's the term here there are different forms of it actually too. There's a form which says dependently related is a way in which it's translated, or one can say dependently originated is another formulation of the same concept. And if we say, then what is dependent origination here? We'll use that translation. And what's the relationship between that and emptiness? The sutra is in the sutra. It's explained that the Buddha has said that which arises contingently doesn't exist. Now here we have to understand. He clarifies this, specifies what he means by "does not exist" later on, and that which arises dependently does not exist. Not exist here means does not exist autonomously. It does not exist autonomously on its own. Here that non-existence, which is specified, the absence of autonomous existence, is another way of saying emptiness. So therefore, and the verse continues to, the statement in the sutra continues to explain that emptiness thus means dependent origination. That the absence of autonomy entails, or it refers to, the fact that things arise in dependence. And so dependent origination and emptiness have that kind of relationship.
전다디 가르친 거래서나 랑신지 매 제외 마시 세와게 랑신지 매 세와게 매바점 맞춰봐. 아니 매바점 맞춰봐. 규전 나서 봐. 차샤 나서 봐라 되어快快봐. 랑신지 매 세와게 매바점 맞춰봐. 규전 나서 봐라 되어 봐. 아니 차샤 나서 봐라 되어快봐.
So here we have to be careful and say, when it says it doesn't exist in the sutra or other places, that means it does not exist by means of intrinsic nature. And so here, what does that mean? What is not existing by means of intrinsic nature? Not existing by means of intrinsic nature means that something arises, if it's a produced thing, created thing, it arises from causes and conditions. It doesn't exist by its intrinsic nature, rather it arises from causes and conditions. Or if one is speaking in terms of things which are composites, a composite thing originates or exists in dependence upon its components or parts.
Oh yeah, 아니다. 강단의 중화되는 맞지와서 나신제 대양 땡중 시험 땡리 시험하게 중화 점씩 맞춰봐. 중화 점 맞춰봐. xian kang la yang ra ma la we ra wang ge wo me ba.
So here then, again, in the case of this term, dependent origination, we also have to understand that it has multiple connotations. One of these is origination as such, in the sense of things that arise from causes and conditions. But the same term actually has the connotation of dependent relations, that things are related in a dependent fashion to other things. So here, when we say that something does not have any kind of intrinsic nature, that means that that absence of intrinsic nature precludes it existing in a way which is not dependent, whether one is speaking dependently originated in the sense of arising from causes and conditions, or it exists contingent upon relationships with other things. So that's dependently related or dependently originated are two senses of the same term here, both indicating the absence of any kind of intrinsic nature.
Oh yeah, chunga zan je ma je ba xian, chunga zam je ba ma yin ba xian kang la yang ra ma la we ra wang yong o me ba je ba yin zang, xian kang la yang ra ma la we ra wang yong o de da du chu ge chu zai. 是吧？我大致出差，看了点呢，看上我，都给让我没把人，看了点呢，看上我，真的让我也把，都给让我没把，这太难打你也把没钱呢，你现在干什么呢？看了点呢，看上我，真的都给真的让我没把人，都给让我没把的太难打你也把人谁干了说那些，让我用我没把的，打给我没把是打去打给我。
So here then, if we're talking about self or intrinsic existence, which are the things to be negated with respect to persons and phenomena, these in this system are synonymous, and if we're defining what this self or this intrinsic existence is, which is to be excluded or negated, it's a kind of character of things which does not depend upon others, a sort of autonomous character of things. The idea, a character of a thing such that it would not rely upon other things for its existence. So in the 400 verses of Master Aryadeva, he explains that in the verse that the self, which is excluded here, which is rejected, is this character, this autonomous character, and nothing at all possesses that kind of character. So therefore, all phenomena, there's no phenomenon whatsoever that possesses intrinsic nature, that possesses this kind of character of autonomy in the sense of not existing such that it does not depend upon other things.
Oh yeah, 天这位天津老友子上外，俺这让星期出发这边打赛瓦当，但呢没把给吃到你个赛瓦印章，俺那打这个他你几家做赛瓦印章。 안에 댄데 데라 리피 자오 세바게 다 데임바레 그봐 다지나서
So this the reason why dependent origination or dependent relation, if we read it that way, is called the king of reasons, is because dependent relatedness or dependent relation or dependent origination is able to eliminate both extremes. It eliminates the extreme of eternalism or permanence, because it excludes excludes the option of things possessing some kind of autonomous character, or any kind of autonomous character or intrinsic nature which it doesn't depend upon other things. And then on the other hand, dependent relation or dependent origination excludes the extreme of nihilism, because, the nihilistic extreme, because it establishes that things exist in that related or dependent fashion.
Oh yeah, that digi kansa dan pumbo teta ane ranshinji maju tende kita la ranshinji maju bagi pela sunyan go wa de sunyan ge tindo ranshinji chuba de ranshinji chu tongba de kila ba. Right? Oh kila ba. Pe koran ane kaso de sunyan koran jigden bala chabi zimba yinbe. Jigden bala chabi zimba sunyan chashindu na wa da maju ba an dala ma chabi kansakiya to niwa yinzang. Pe tiki negi ane sunyan chashindu na wa da maju ba na xin sunyan wa kara suna rangshin ji chuwa na yang na wa da maju ba de sunyan de to la yo re. 我因咱苏年别个我的，俺那苏年一定都让当你到过是吧？到我的到拉我的看着人说呢，几点把它差别只把人吧。可苏年那我的马主把的，大家给打了马上给天这给多多啊。我一在太多多把人家，让先去做那我的苏年一定都去了吧。
So why is the reason why we employ the example of the reflected image, not in the mirror, as an example of absence of intrinsic existence, is because even everyday, ordinary people, any kind of person without you don't need some special education or whatever to understand that the reflected image is not an actual face, is not a real face. So everyone, adults that understand things in a common way, understand that that the reflected image is not a real face. Though it appears like a real face, it doesn't exist as a real face. So that example then enables us to understand, or is a good example for understanding how things appear as if they were real. That is, as if they appear as if they were established by means of their own intrinsic nature, but they're devoid or empty of that intrinsic nature. So we can understand, just as the reflected image appears falsely as a face, we can understand then that phenomena, or persons and other phenomena, appear falsely as if they possessed intrinsic existence. And therefore, the reflected image is used as an example to make it easier for us to understand the way in which phenomena appear falsely, as if they were really established by means of their own intrinsic nature.
Oh yeah, that teacher la, don't you talk about type of good and bad, say that do seem bad. Don't you talk about type of good and bad, say the type of tobala, and the tobayan was some talk of grace. Now, trip down Oma Ranju Bagi, Dinzo Gala, and it type of tobala, don't you want to talk Mugoba? What did him, don't you talk Mugoba? Church dancing, dancing you can on a church dancing, she do yimba. And you do my yimba. Only Kasaka Dame Chamo de Yang, and a Kasarashi member the Kasaka Dame Chamo Mashoba. Oh, Kasa Tenda member Kasaka Dame Chamo Mashoba, Kasaraja to be Zagutamba, Kasa Dame Chamo Shagavare. In the Kasaka dancing, Raja to be Zay to Truba to be Zimbabwe Chaguva in the Ranjuba Manjegi, Tarba Tobala, Tomba Yungusu to Tom Mugova. That Taba Tobala, Tomba Yungusum to talk over the Taju Tomo Mine, Chachiva in that did go in.
So here then, the next topic is explaining how it is that that understanding emptiness is the cause of liberation. Now, understanding, or here we would specify realizing emptiness through perception. Having a direct perception of emptiness is the cause of liberation. Now, in other systems of Buddhist philosophy, other than the Prasangika Madhyamika, they do not accept this position that it's necessary to have a direct realization of emptiness in order to achieve liberation. They define, they say that the misapprehension of self, of phenomena, is one of the obscurations that prevent omniscience, and therefore you don't need to get rid of that in order to achieve liberation as such. In order to achieve liberation alone, one needs to eliminate all of the obscurations that are mental afflictions. And according to these systems, the Swatantrika Madhyamika and so forth, that accept the two kinds of obscurations, they would say that the obscuration that is a mental affliction that must be gotten rid of in order to achieve liberation is the misapprehension of the person as if it possessed a self in the sense of being a substance which is self-sufficient. Technical definition here of the notion of selflessness that they understand as the selflessness of persons. And they say that by simply eliminating that misconception of the self of persons, and the self in the sense of a person having being a self-sufficient substance, that alone is, elimination of that alone is adequate to achieve liberation from samsara. Then they would say that the misconception which holds self of phenomena, that holds phenomena to be established by means of their ultimately, would fall under the category of obscurations that prevent omniscience. Now here in this text, Master Nagarjuna is going to show that the misconception of the self of phenomena, that is the misconception that holds phenomena as being established by means of their own intrinsic nature, is itself a obscuration which is a mental affliction, and therefore it is necessary to eliminate that. In order to, that is, elimination of that is the cause that gives rise to liberation. And so here, this is illustrating one of the special features of the Prasangika Madhyamika system, which is unique to it and distinguishes it from the systems of Buddhist philosophy other than it.
Oh, yeah, that's
So here this afternoon, afternoon session, if you have some questions, you can write them up and give them to me.
Oh, yeah.
There'll be an opportunity.